So I only got a chance as I was preparing to leave and getting ready to leave my house to drive here. I only got a chance to see some of Trump's joint press conference with Vladimir Putin. And part of it, I have to admit, gave me a bit of a Helsinki feeling. I think that, there are things that Trump does that, when he's standing with Vladimir Putin or anybody, he's always thinking about the negotiation. He's always thinking about his personal relationship in a negotiation. So he's always thinking, well, I can't sit here and say Vladimir Putin is a gangster and then go back and talk to him and say, hey, can you help me out in Syria? So he's not going to do that, despite the fact that everything the left is doing, everything the press is doing is geared toward estranging the two countries. However, when Trump makes a mistake, if you pay attention, when he makes a real faux pas, as I think he did this morning, it's always a left-wing mistake. You have to remember that Trump spent most of his life as a Democrat kind of trending to the left. And then he slowly became what we call politically mature. And now I think he's been a great conservative president. He really has been. But sometimes I've seen him do this before, and it's always this thing. The left likes to compare apples to dictators, right? They treat the things that happen in our country as if they were the same as things that happen in a genuinely oppressive country. So you make a comment they don't like, you're Hitler. If a gay guy has to drive an extra half a mile to get a wedding cake, it's like he's oppressed. He's oppressed. They didn't throw him off a roof, but they wouldn't give him those florets he likes on his wedding cake because he's gay. So he's oppressed. They're comparing apples to dictators. And Donald Trump did that. I'm going to get into this whole Mueller indictment thing because I think a lot of it is, I think the way the press is covering it is absolute nonsense. But they asked him, obviously, a reporter asked him about the relationships between Russia and America. And Trump had tweeted out that we were both to blame. So here's the answer that he gave.
Mr. President, you tweeted this morning that it's U.S. foolishness, stupidity, and the Mueller probe that is responsible for the decline in U.S. relations with Russia. Do you hold Russia at all accountable for anything in particular? And if so, what would you consider them that they are responsible for?
Yes, I do. I hold both countries responsible. I think that the United States has been foolish. I think we've all been foolish. We should have had this dialogue a long time ago, a long time, frankly, before I got to office. And I think we're all to blame. I think that the United States now has stepped forward along with Russia, and we're getting together, and we have a chance to do some great things, whether it's nuclear proliferation in terms of stopping. We have to do it. Ultimately, that's probably the most important thing that we can be working on. But I do feel that we have both made some mistakes. I think that the probe is a disaster for our country.
So that to me is like saying, that's like Elliot Ness getting up and saying the bad relations between the FBI and Al Capone mob, we both made mistakes, It's not the same thing. Putin is as bad as people say he is. He is a gangster. He is a murderer. He is an invader of other countries. He's a czar. He's bringing back the age of the czars. And to sit there and compare Bob Mueller to Vladimir Putin is comparing a cake shop that won't give you a wedding cake to like Muslims throwing gays off roofs. It's comparing apples to dictators. And that is a mistake that Trump makes because he used to be a left winger and because he's a negotiator. And so he wants to flatter and appease Putin. In spite of the fact, let's always remember that while Obama was doing absolutely nothing to Russia, Trump has supplied the Ukrainian rebels with arms, with lethal weapons. He has sanctioned some of these oligarchs who live off their ability to take their millions, rip off Russia for millions, and then bring their money over here. He has done all kinds of things to really make life tough for Putin. So in terms of action, Trump is doing very well. But always with Trump, there's, the whole thing is, the media works through noise. Everything in the media is noise.
Hammering. Stop the hammering out there. Who's got a hammer? Where is it? Where's the hammer? Is it on the... Go up on the other floor. Somebody go up there and stop the hammering. Stop the hammering.
If they stopped the hammering, like the entire media would go off the air. What the media does with Republican presidents is they create all this noise, all this panic, all this stuff that is based on zero or on nothing. Mitt Romney's an evil guy because maybe he did something in high school that was not that nice, or he put his dog on the roof when he went on a trip. So there's lots and lots of noise surrounding Ron. Oh, he put women in binders. That was my favorite. What the hell did that even mean? It meant he had binders filled with women's resumes. So what a gaffe, what a terrible gaffe. So then if Mitt Romney actually does something wrong, or if he makes a mistake, then it seems to be part of this massive, massive problem Mitt Romney gets, instead of media noise, and then maybe Mitt Romney made an actual mistake. When it comes to, of course, the left, when it's Barack Obama, IRS, shutting down the opposition, never heard of it. Lying about Benghazi? No, he didn't lie about Benghazi. Sending in the FBI to investigate the opposition? No, it just looks that way because the FBI was investigating the opposition at Obama's request. So it just looks like that was, so they surround them with this kind of cone of silence, but they surround Republicans with noise. So let's just look at this Mueller indictment, because this is basically what he goes into this summit, what he went into this summit with, okay? The expression, you can indict a Hamsky Samovich, it's like, what basically is going on? Look, this is not to put forward a conspiracy theory. It truly is not. But there is such a thing. There are such things as politicized prosecutors. And we don't know yet whether Mueller is one or not. We really don't. He's a lot of suspicious stuff. So many Democrats. He did get rid of Strzok, which was a good thing. But so many Democrats, so many angry Democrats, lots of them Hillary supporters. So we don't know. Is he a totally politicized prosecutor? He might be. But I will say this. These indictments come out after this absolute circus of Peter Strzok being questioned by the House committee and making the FBI look like crap. Strzok, that hearing was a circus, but I think what most people came away from, except the Democrats trying to cover up for him, was this is a mess. So it comes right before that, right after that, and right before the Helsinki summit. And you think to yourself, these guys are never, what he did was he indicted a federal grand jury, returned an indictment against a dozen Russians. These are Russian military security people, basically saying that they were going into the Democrats' emails and that they are the ones who put out all these emails that went to WikiLeaks and so on.
The defendants worked for 2 units of the main intelligence directorate of the Russian General Staff, known as the GRU. The units engaged in active cyber operations to interfere in the 2016 presidential election. There was one unit that engaged in active cyber operations by stealing information, and a different unit that was responsible for disseminating the stolen information. The defendants used 2 techniques to steal information. First, they used a scheme known as spear phishing, which involves sending misleading email messages and tricking the users into disclosing their passwords and security information. Second, the defendants hacked into computer networks and installed malicious software that allowed them to spy on users and capture keystrokes, take screenshots, and exfiltrate or remove data from those computers.
Okay, so he's accusing. Now, again, these guys will never be extradited. They will never be tried. These are just charges that they're making, okay? And I'm not saying the charges are wrong. I'm not saying anything about them, but I am saying, look, these came out at a certain point. They came out after the Strzok hearing, which I thought was just a disaster for the FBI. Let's take a look at some of the Strzok hearing just for a minute. I know it's a little bit of a diversion, but still. Peter Strzok, this is the guy, obviously, who was writing to his adulterous lover, also working with the FBI, about how much he hated Trump, and he was going to get an insurance policy in case he won, and he was going to stop him from becoming president, and all this stuff. And he comes up, and first of all, he's got this face. When you caught his expressions, like, I actually took one of his expressions and put it on Twitter with the caption, "Have the lambs stopped screaming, Clarice?" Because he looked just like Hannibal Lecter in the movie. And it got retweeted 4,000 times, 20,000 likes. So anyway, he goes up there, and first Trey Gowdy goes against them. And I'm not going to play all this stuff, but I got to play at least a couple of cuts. Trey Gowdy just says, you were thrown off the probe, because what Strzok is saying is, yes, well, maybe I said some bad things, but that doesn't mean I'm biased. I've never been biased. I've never been biased. And Gowdy says, You were thrown off the probe. Here's the question.
If you were kicked off when you read the text, shouldn't you have been kicked off when you wrote them?
Not at all.
Well, it wasn't the discovery of your text, Mr. Strzok. It was the existence of your bias that got you kicked off.
No, Mr. Gowdy, it wasn't. I do not have bias. My personal opinions in no way.
Well, then why
have
did
ever
you get kicked
impacted
off?
Permit.
Why'd you get kicked off?
Mr. Gowdy, my understanding of why I was kicked off was that based on understanding of those texts and the perception that they might create is
Well,
something that
hang on a
Special
second,
Counsel
Agent
Mueller,
Strzok. Hang
who's a
on a
man of
second.
extraordinary
Perception.
integrity.
You're saying it was the perception. There are 13 Democrats on the special counsel probe, including one who went to what he hoped was a victory party. That's a perception problem, too. They weren't kicked off. You were. Why were you kicked off?
Yeah, because, I mean, they're all Democrats, but he was kicked off. So it does look awfully bad. And then there was this exchange with Louis Gohmert. And you'll listen to the Democrats are trying to shut them down. And the Democrats, one of them actually said, this guy deserves a Purple Heart. I mean, this is what the military gives you if you're wounded in action. This guy's an embarrassment, clearly an embarrassment. And Louis Gohmert was just hilarious.
The disgrace
Mr.
is what this man has done.
The gentleman from Texas will suspend for a moment.
There is the disgrace. And it won't be recaptured anytime soon because of the damage you've done to the justice system. And I've talked to FBI agents around the country. You've embarrassed them. You've embarrassed yourself. And I can't help but wonder when I see you looking there with a little smirk, how many times did you look so innocent into your wife's eye and lie to her about Lisa?
Mr. Chairman, this is outrageous.
The credibility of a witness
Shame
is
on
always
you,
an
Mr.
issue.
Chairman.
and
Mr.
you
Chairman, please. There's
have
You
no-
Mr. Chairman, this is intolerable harassment of the
What is
witness.
wrong with that? You need your medication.
Oh, I love this country. I just love it. You only get this in a free country. That was hilarious. But listen, plenty of adulterers have done good things in the world, I have to admit. But you do say, well, you're sitting there swearing, that you're going to tell the truth to us, but you also swore to be faithful to your wife. So it does speak somewhat to character. However, so that all this noise is going on, right? And then these indictments come out, and you'll hear both people on the left and the kind of never-Trumpers saying, oh, look how many indictments there are. Look how many indictments. But these are indictments that will never, ever, ever be tried or proven, right? These are just charges that are being made, and we don't know if they're true. We don't know. Devin Nunes or Nono, whatever the hell his name is, he said this was in our report. This was in the House report. So they think it's true, too, but they also think that they were hacking the Republicans or trying to hack the Republicans as well. Now, you want to know how the left is playing this, right? And are you going to tell me that the FBI isn't in touch with the New York Times? Of course they are. They've been leaking stuff to the New York Times since this stuff happened. So here's what I'm saying. I'm not saying it's a conspiracy. I'm just saying timing is struck, humiliates the FBI. Trump is on his way to Helsinki. They release these indictments, and then the New York Times, reliably selling the left-wing line, well, let's take a trip to Knocklehead Road, the op-ed page of the New York Times.
Oh, hey, hey, oh, hey, ho. Let's go waltzing down to Knocklehead Road.
Here's the New York Times on this indictment. The 37-page indictment handed up by a federal grand jury in Washington amounted to a detailed rebuttal of Mr. Trump, who has sowed doubts that Russia interfered in the election and dismissed questions about its meddling as fake news. First of all, that's a half-truth right there. I mean, what Trump has been saying repeatedly is this is a witch hunt because there was no collusion. While he was standing next to Putin, he said, well, Putin does deny it, but that's not the same as saying it's untrue. What he has said, his thing about a witch hunt has been about his collusion. All right, goes on. This is the Times. Mr. Mueller has gathered extensive evidence of contacts between Russia and the Trump campaign. This is the New York Times, right? Mr. Trump's eldest son met with a Russian lawyer in hopes of receiving political dirt on Mrs. Clinton. Okay, we have gone through that extensively. As far as Trump Jr. knew, this was not an agent of the Russian government. It was a Russian, but still, it was a stupid meeting to take. He got out of it pretty fast. One advisor has admitted being tipped off in advance to Russian hacking of Democratic emails. Untrue. This is Papadopoulos they're talking about, and he said he was not tipped off in advance. He just said that he knew that they had them, and that went to the Australians, and they're claiming that began the investigation. Almost certainly untrue as well. Another was in contact with a Twitter account used by Russian hackers. What the hell does that mean? We're all in contact with a Twitter account used by Russian hackers. A federal judge found this is the one I love. A federal judge found probable cause that a third advisor was an unlawful Russian agent. That's the FISA guy who was shown the Steele dossier, which we now know is complete garbage. As Trump said during this press conference, he said if the Steele dossier had anything, they'd have released it by now. So that's nonsense. But again, it's creating this noise. It's creating this noise that if so much stuff is happening, if I pound my fist on the table long enough, we're having an earthquake. If so much stuff is happening, then there must be something going on. There's all this smoke.
Stop the hammering. Stop the hammering out there. Who's got a hammer?
Yeah, it's like you've got the hammer. The news media's got the hammer, and they make all this noise. Let me play a couple of things just to show you how the noise is created. Sam Vinograd, I don't know how to pronounce her name. She's this cutie pie who was a former aide to Obama, and she goes on. I guess it's CNN. Let's look at her at CNN first, and she calls Trump a Russian tool, right?
Well, what we definitely know is that Trump and Vladimir Putin actually have a few things in common when it comes to the media. Both of them happen to be propaganda machines. They spread misinformation, disinformation, and sow divisions in the United States. That's Russia's mission, we know from the intelligence community. And Donald Trump has proven himself to be a tool, a Russian tool, for spreading that misinformation and disinformation.
All right, now on CNN, on this show, Trump is a tool. Then Jake Tapper asks the big question, which is all this hacking went on under Obama. Trump had nothing to do with it. Obama was sitting there and Obama knew about it and he didn't do diddly. And so Jake Tapper asks the question. Suddenly she sings an entirely different song.
You read this indictment and you think, boy, the Obama administration, they really kind of missed the ball on this. I mean, yes, they issued that report, but President Obama said, what did he say? He told Putin to cut it out or knock it off. It wasn't particularly strong. And then there was all this hesitation about warning the American people for fear of looking partisan. In retrospect, doesn't it seem to you that perhaps the Obama administration was at least to a degree asleep at the switch?
Well, I'm not here to be an apologist for the Obama administration. I was gone when this happened. But I think we have two separate things here. We have, one, what intelligence did we have when this attack started? So 2016, 2015, 2014, when did we start to know what the Russians were up to? That's question number one. Question number two is, why were we ineffective in deterring that ongoing attack? And we're still ineffective. We know from various sources, public and private, that this attack hasn't stopped. There's bipartisan agreement on that. And not one president, whether it be Obama or President Trump, has figured out how to deter Vladimir Putin. So it's not a question in Helsinki about whether Donald Trump raises election meddling. He can raise it. Has he prepared enough to figure out how to deter President Putin from continuing doing what he's doing?
So on one show, she's saying he's a tool of Russia. And then Tapper points out that it was Obama. And she says, well, we've all made mistakes, and I wasn't there at the time. It's just a completely different narrative when she's confronted, because she knows nobody's going to pay attention and compare it. You know, you have to go back to when they sat down, when Trump and Putin first sat down, Trump winked at Putin. We have a little clip of that. It's like just 2 seconds long. They're sitting together and he gives them a wink hello. Yeah, and they close in on it. And of course, the left goes nuts. They play it over and over again. That was a wink. Oh my God, Trump looks like he just got schooled by his teacher. This is on Twitter. Only Trump could make Putin look like the classy one. Very awkward body language. The whole thing. But you remember back in 2012 when Obama said to Dmitry Medvedev, then the outgoing president of Russia, who was about to give way and let Putin become president for life, right? When he made that comment about the missile defense system that Putin didn't want going into Europe, and Obama, who later got rid of the missile defense system, promised Medvedev, Nunes, whatever his name is, that he would, after the election, after he didn't have to deal with the voters anymore, he would get out of it. You know, instead of just playing the clip of that, do we have how CBS reported that?
President Obama was far from Washington today in South Korea for a summit with world leaders on nuclear security. But he couldn't escape presidential politics, not after a live live microphone picked up a comment that he made to the Russian president. Senior White House correspondent Bill Plant is traveling with the president in Seoul tonight. Bill?
Scott, President Obama and outgoing Russian President Medvedev were still deep in conversation as cameras were ushered into the room. And President Obama was overheard giving Medvedev a very candid political assessment of his ability to deal with the major problems between the U.S. and Russia. All of the issues can be solved, the president told Medvedev, but he stressed that it was particularly important for incoming Russian President Vladimir Putin to give him space on the missile defense system, which the U.S. and NATO want to install in Europe.
They put it in this context. It's presidential, politics. And then later on they say, oh, the Republicans made a big fuss over this, but it's just campaign rhetoric and all this. As a result of this, because they surround the Republicans in noise, when Trump made a mistake, which I think he did with what he said at the conference, the one thing we can count on is that they'll overreact, so they'll kind of make it look much less bad than it actually was. But Trump makes a mistake and it all becomes part of this noise. And you say, oh my gosh, there's this going on, and they're calling him is it treason? Is he a traitor? It's just Trump negotiating, right? But they surround the left with silence. So now, years later, Katie Tour is on NBC, and somebody mentions the fact that Obama promised Medvedev that he would get rid of these missiles as soon as he wasn't responsible to the American populace, right? And listen what Katie Tour says.
Well, I think it was Obama that leaned over to Putin and said, I'll have a little more flexibility to give you what you want after the re-election.
I'm sorry, I don't know what you're referring to, Congressman.
Remember when he leaned over at a panel discussion or at a meeting and he said, I'll have more flexibility after the election. No one really ever pushed the president on what he meant by that, but I can only assume for a thug like Putin that it would embolden him.
So what we've got, Katie Tour has never heard of it. She's never heard of it because she herself is part of an industry that wrapped Obama's failures and corruption in silence and is making noise about every misstatement or stumble that Donald Trump makes. The true news story right now is that the Russian collusion investigation really does look like a political event. It really does look like a political event. Some indictments have been handed down that have nothing to do with Donald Trump, but even if the indictments are true, even if the charges are true, they'll never be proved. So they're not evidence right now of anything. Meanwhile, Donald Trump went through Europe, got them to spend more money on defense at NATO. He's now talking to Putin, which we need to do, talking to North Korea. He's doing a good job. He's just learned to fight noise with noise. And so it's all kind of like a lot of noise that we got to listen through to get to the truth.